Hi, friends and neighbors. This is your friend Hank Snow, here to remind you that I'm soon going to be doing the Ralph Emery Show with my good friend Ralph.
It is my pleasure this week to welcome to our show Hank Snow. And Hank, I wish you would retell the story that Steve Scholes told us one night when we were celebrating your 25 years with RCA about that crazy train song that he kept turning down. He didn't want to record on Moving On, did he?
Well, it was my first recording session in the United States, Ralph. It was back in the spring of 1949. And I was in Chicago, and Charlie Greon was with him, as a matter of fact. And I believe Al Gallico. And we were all in the room, and I was sitting on the side of the bed, very nervous, singing over the songs that I had written. And I sang about 6 or 7 of them over, and he liked them. But the song that I had the most faith in, I was kind of saving for last, and so I sang Moving On. He said, no way. No way.
What did he say about that song?
Well, he said it's just, it's not, train songs aren't going. He said, I don't think that would go. He said, you got some good material there. Let's forget about the train song.
How were you ultimately able to convince him?
Well, actually, I was, of course, very disappointed that particular night when he told me that because I had a lot of faith in the song. I had been trying to write that thing for 2 or 3 years. So I didn't say anything more about it, and then the next day we recorded in the studios in Chicago, and as I say now, this was in 49, and in 1950 I came to the Opry, January the 7th, 1950. Then I did my first recording session in Nashville in the old Brown Studios downtown. So I said to my wife, I said, now, he turned that song down, but I said, now, I'm going to do this song tonight, but I'm not, he'll never remember the song. He'll never remember the song, so I'm just going to do the song. So when we got in the studio, I remember Tommy Vaden was on the session, and Ernie Newton was playing bass for me and so forth. So Steve was the one that came out. He said, hey, that needs an introduction like this on that fiddle, that da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
He said, that's it. So he's the one that came up with the introduction idea.
But did he remember this?
No, he did not remember the song.
He didn't remember he had turned it down previously?
He did not remember that he had turned it down. So later on, I told him after the thing became well known, and it was, it became an international hit quite soon, thanks to the good Lord. And then I used to rib him about it. And I said, Steve, but on your show that night, I said, Steve, I'll make you feel good, though, if you remember. I told him, I said, you may have been right. Timing means everything, and probably it wasn't the right timing, and we may have recorded the thing, and it may have been a dud. So I said, I'm going to give you the credit, and thanks for holding it back for 1950. And he got a big kick out of that.
Was it the song of the year that year?
Yeah, it still holds the all-time record, Ralph, for the best country song.
And what do you mean, the all-time record?
For the best country song. The most played and so forth. I think this was by Billboard, put out by Billboard.
The most played country song?
Yeah, the most played country song.
Now, you wrote the song.
Yeah.
Is it still recorded today? I know Don Gibson did a version of it one time.
Yeah. Ray Charles was on the Mike Douglas show the other morning, and he gave me a real nice plug, as a matter of fact, but he said my song was the first country song that he'd ever recorded, and that was Moving On. But I have had to date about 47 cuts in different languages and so forth from across the world. I have them all home.
Oh, really?
I have a Dutch copy, a French copy, and...
How does it sound in Dutch?
Ralph, I wish I'd have just thought I'd have brought some of those out here tonight, but the next time we visit, I'll have to.
Okay. Hank, are you, first of all, where are you from in Canada?
Well, of course, Canada is divided up in provinces like we are in states here, and then in the provinces, of course, they have counties, the same as we do here, and I come from the province of Nova Scotia, the county of Queens in Nova Scotia, and a small town called Brooklyn.
Brooklyn?
Brooklyn, which is 2 miles from Liverpool, and not Liverpool, England. 2 miles from Liverpool, so a lot of people get it confused, and in a lot of the stories they've written, they say born in Liverpool. But with it being 2 miles apart, we won't argue about it. But actually, it was a little town called Brooklyn.
But did they ever think you were from the borough of Brooklyn, New York?
Well, I hadn't heard of that. I hadn't heard of that one.
I was asking Hank Snow about his Canadian birth, but you now are a naturalized American citizen, aren't you, Hank?
Yes, since 1958, Ralph.
So you've been naturalized American for more than 15 years.
Yeah, right.
Was that a long process?
No, really it wasn't. It was very simple. Of course, you have to know the ins and outs and the layout of the American government and so forth, the American government, how it's run and so forth, the upper house, the lower house. And
You have, in other words...
Well, you make a study of the DAR manual, the Daughters of American Revolution manual, and then...
civics course.
More or less. And then you come up for your exams, and you have 40 questions out of the complete manual, and you don't know which questions they're going to be, and you're only allowed to miss 3 out of the 40. So I qualified with flying colors because I had always made a great study of the United States. I loved the country, and I loved to read about it, and any chance I get to see a movie with anything of the United States, I was always there.
So you do have to be thoroughly grounded in American history.
You certainly do.
My guest is Hank Snow. Hank, I want to ask you about a rather tragic incident that happened in your group recently. Since this program is broadcast all over the United States, the story might have been twisted a little bit, but you had a young man named Jimmy Widner that played for you, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe he fell victim to a mugging that turned out to be his murder recently, didn't it?
Yeah, that was a very gruesome tragedy, Ralph. Jimmy had played and worked with me exclusively for nearly 12 years, and one of the finest people I ever employed, really. Perfect gentleman, good businessman, and highly educated.
Wasn't he an Air Force veteran?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, he had the Distinguished Flying Cross as one of the, I think, 10, 11 medals that he had. Very faithful, and to sum it all up, my right arm as road manager and musician.
He ran the band, didn't he?
He ran the whole works, that's right.
What,
Well, we played Tulsa. We came back from England. We was in England on tour for about 18 days, 20 days, and we came back from England. I think we got back here on the 20th or the 21st of November. And then we was booked in Tulsa, Oklahoma, along with our good friend, the late Tex Ritter, and Bill Monroe. Was booked in Tulsa on Saturday, November the 24th. Played the shows, and we came back. We got to back in Nashville on Sunday, the 25th. On the 26th, I had talked to Jimmy a couple of times on the telephone because he had had his guitar broken coming back from England. We was discussing the problem with the airport and the insurance and that. That was on the 26th. On the 27th, in the afternoon, he was to sit in on a meeting for me in my absence because I was committed to other things at the Opry House. So he attended the meeting at 2:30.
the meeting was about the energy crisis,
right.
wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. 2 o'clock on the 27th. And he attended the meeting, and he was supposed to report to me that night and let me know, what happened. And 10:30 that night, he was robbed, severely beaten, almost beyond recognition, and shot twice. And Wednesday morning, the next morning at 5 o'clock, I was awakened. My son, who lives next door, called me and said, "Dad, the police are here, and they wanted to talk to you." And I couldn't think for the life of me what the police were there at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I let them in, and they said, "You're supposed to call Lieutenant Tom Cathy." And I was still shocked and half asleep, so I called the lieutenant, and he said, "Do you know a man by the name of Jimmy Widner?" And I said, "Yes." He asked me a few more questions. He said, "Well, I'm indeed sorry to inform you that Mr. Widner is deceased." And then I had to do a thing that was one of, I guess, the most horrible thing that I have ever had to do, the worst experience I have ever had to do. I had to go to the hospital downtown and identify him, just as they had picked him up out of the gutter.
Hank, didn't he play the rhythm guitar?
Yeah, he played rhythm guitar, and when he got through playing his guitar in Tulsa, Oklahoma, he always had a certain way of putting his pick between the strings and the guitar. I have the guitar hanging in my studio at home. I have a big bouquet of artificial flowers in it with different lights coming out of the middle of the flowers. And I drilled the pick. I didn't move the pick. I drilled 2 holes in the pick and took a wire and put it through the pick and made it fast, so it is there from now on, exactly as Jimmy left.
I know you'll miss him very much.
Very much. I just can't adjust to the fact he's gone.
My guest this week is Hank Snow, America's singing ranger. How'd that get started, Hank?
Ralph, that is many, many years ago that started, many years ago.
Did you start it, or did some promo?
No, I'll tell you how that started. You know, of course, I always admired the late Jimmie Rodgers, as many of us artists, and of course, Jimmy was really my inspiration. And Jimmy, at one time, went under the name of America's Blue Yodeler and the Yodeling Brakeman. So, and the Yodeling Ranger, different names. Well, back in those days, back in the late 30s, I used to yodel a little bit. And so I want to keep as close to Jimmy as I could, so I call myself Hank the Yodeling Ranger. Then my voice started to deepen a little bit, and it got to where I couldn't get a falsetto. So I had to change that to Hank the Singing Ranger. And then finally, we just dropped it.
Hank, I want to play one of your classics, I Don't Hurt Anymore, but there's a mistake in this record. Now remember, the title of this song is I Don't Hurt Anymore. The first thing when we play the record, you will hear Hank voice a mistake as he sings It Don't Hurt Anymore.
Yeah.
How'd that happen?
That's one of the few songs I recorded in New York City where you have no atmosphere to do a country song, believe me. And this is the way the song went, I Don't Hurt Anymore. But I was all nervous and so forth, and I just missed it and said, It Don't Hurt Anymore. So Steve Sholes was our recording manager at the time, and Steve said, let's leave that in there. And I think it helped sell the record.
Of course, with disc jockeys, it made them feel kind of foolish in the beginning because they might give you a nice big fat introduction. Here's Hank Snow to sing I Don't Hurt Anymore. And right away, they think the disc jockeys missed it, see? Because he comes on singing It Don't Hurt Anymore.
Yeah.
Hank, I want to ask you about your son, Jimmy. He is your only son, isn't he?
Yes,
And I think many people realize that he is a minister, a preacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize he lived next door to you.
Yes,
Do you go to his church?
Mm-hmm.
Are you a member of his church?
Mm-hmm.
I presume, I can recall the days when Jimmy was also a regular entertainer, made records for Victor. Was he a part of your show?
Yes, from the time he was 4 years old.
You're kidding.
He was on the stage with me and done a lot of traveling when we used to live out of a suitcase, and was kind of slack on his schooling at the time, too, but we had to do something because we had to live.
Did you ever make a record together?
Yeah, we cut a record, a Jimmie Rodgers number together called When Jimmie Rodgers Said Goodbye.
'Cause I was thinking perhaps you did. He was on Victor at one time.
Yeah, we got him a contract with Victor, and he cut about 8 sides, I believe, for RCA. But his mind was not in show business, really. His mind, Jimmy was always Bible-minded. He was always religious-minded. And I've often came home at night and Jimmy be laying in bed reading his Bible and so forth. And then, of course, at the age probably around, I think, 15 or 16, when he'd do shows with me, and I used to get costumes for him the same as mine. We used to dress alike and so forth in the Western costumes. But when Jimmy got applause on the show, Jimmy thought it was because of the old man that he was,
I see.
You see, and he had that complex.
My guest is Hank Snow. Hank, earlier you made some reference to a bed. Was that a story you were going to tell us on this show?
Well, not in particular, but if you wanted me to, and we have the time, it would only take an hour or so.
Now, you had some old bed that...
No, when we first got married, we didn't have any money, naturally. What was money? Who ever heard tell of it? But we bought this bed at the second-hand store for $2. It was one of them old iron beds, and as I say, it was so wobbly, we had to drive a nail in the wall and tie the thing up to the wall. And finally, it wouldn't hold that, so then we had to discard the bed and sleep on the mattress. But my wife's parents, who used to visit us quite often, as I say, if they'd have knew we were starving to death, they'd have certainly came to our rescue, but we had too much pride. But I remember we had 2 little rooms, and Jimmy was only 6 months old, and my wife's mother came to visit one afternoon, and Jimmy crawled off of the mattress. He could crawl, at the age of 6, and he just crawled around.
At the age of 6 months, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
And here he come crawling around the door, and my wife's mother said, "My goodness, how did that child get out of that bed?" We didn't have far to go, just get off of the mattress on the floor. So she thought, how did he get out? How did he get out of the bed?
It was right on the floor.
Yeah. There's a long story with that, how we got clear of that bed and bought a new one, because we was living in a house where there's about 7 other tenants, and you could hear right through the walls. It was like tissue paper. And they knew through remarks it was made because I made a joke out of the thing, and I wouldn't say, well, let's go to bed, it's time to go to bed. I'd say, well, let's go to floor, And these people this taxi driver that lived on the other side of the house, right through the wall, he heard this, and the news was getting around. Here's a guy that's on the radio. He's a big radio star on CHNS, and he's sleeping on the floor. But I started teaching guitar. I'll make this very brief. I started teaching guitar, and I started getting a few bucks in, so I went to the store and got a new bed, $1 down, $1 a week, or $1 down, $1 next payment when you catch me, or something like that. So I said, don't deliver this bed till after dark tonight. So when he delivered the bed after dark, I hurried that bed in there and had him take the old one away. We set up the new bed, and I remember it was wrapped in this paper with this shavings or something. What do you call that, this stuff in this paper? To keep it?
Shavings.
Shavings, yeah. Okay, well, that's close enough. So they could hear through the walls, and as I ripped the paper off, I would cough so they couldn't hear me ripping the paper. So I go, and I'd rip the paper off. So we got the new bed up and in place. I remember it was $20 for the bed, and the very next day the landlord wanted to paint around the carpet in the bedroom. And the only reason he wanted to do that, because they've never offered to paint anything before that, he just wanted to make sure whether we were sleeping on the floor or not. But what a surprise he got. We was living in riches then.
That's a funny story. It wasn't funny then, though, was it?
Not too much.
Hank, a lot of your early career was spent in Texas after you came into the United States, wasn't it?
Well, Dallas was very lucky for me. I moved from Los Angeles. I was in California. I moved out there from Canada and stayed out there a year and a half and literally starved to death out there. And then I had a Canadian record that someone had sent down to, I think, Pappy Hal Horton. And he was playing it, and this became the #1 record on the station there and held the #1 spot for 16 weeks. It was called Brand on My Heart. So a young lady there that I'd been corresponding with, who'd done a lot of publicity work for the different artists, B. Terry in Greenville, Texas, wrote to me and said, you ought to come down here because this record's red hot. So I moved from there and drove to Dallas and drove my horse van. I had somebody drive my horse van, and so we all went down to Dallas, and I got in Dallas. I had $11 in my pocket. And started working in Dallas, and it was through my starting in Dallas that I met Ernest Tubb, who, bless his heart, is responsible for my getting on the Grand Ole Opry. There's no ways around it, to get from it. Ernest is the one that got me to the Grand Ole Opry. But Brand on My Heart done me a lot of good around Texas because, as a matter of fact, I still hold the house record at the Big D Jamboree. At the same time, Eddie Arnold was very hot with Bouquet of Roses and things like that, but I still hold the all-time record with 7,000-some people on the strength of that song, Brand on My Heart.
Which was a Canadian release.
Which was a Canadian release.
Hank, we've talked about your poor beginnings, but you've since become an international star. Don't you have a fan club in faraway Ceylon?
Ralph, I've got many fan clubs, believe me. I've got a fan club in Czechoslovakia. I've got one in Ceylon. I have one in England. I have one in Australia. I have one in Japan, one in Canada. Well, actually, the Canadian fan club is run by the same folks that run the American fan club.
But people write to you from all over the world.
Yes, I do. I get letters from all over the world, and I answer them.
How about if they're in a foreign language?
That has very rarely happened. I've had a couple of letters come to me in German, and I think there was somebody at the college out here that I had. Somebody referred me to this gentleman at the college who translated those for me, but that very rarely ever happened.
But you do have a fan club behind the Iron Curtain.
Yes, definitely, in Czechoslovakia, in Prague.
How old is that fan club?
Oh, 7 or 8 years.
Have you ever thought about singing behind the Iron Curtain?
Yeah, it's been mentioned. Lucky Mola, who books me, the Mola Talent Agency, they've spoke about it different times. But these folks play my records. I've sent them down many albums and single records, and
must please you.
It certainly does. It's very gratifying.
Now, you knew Hank Williams Sr. very well. Mm-hmm. Traveled with him, toured with him. How would you?
Years.
I beg your pardon?
About 3 years off and on.
How well do you know Hank Williams Jr.?
Very well, and I like the kid very much.
You know what I'm leading up to. I want you to compare the two. How do they compare? Can you see any similarities in
Yes,
Junior?
In the actions, I certainly can. In the actions and the everyday life, and there's a great comparison.
How about on stage? Do they resemble one another?
Yeah. Hank has the same stance to Hank Jr. that his dad had. I've noticed that he stands. Have you ever seen him on stage? I'm sure you have. Don't you think he stands up just like the dad with the 1 foot back and kind of a Johnny Cash pose?
Well, now, Hank Sr. was much slimmer, wasn't he?
Yes.
In fact, they used to call him Old Bones, didn't they?
Yeah, that's one time.
I couldn't have Hank Snow on this show without asking him about Jimmie Rodgers. I know you have a museum at your house, Hank, And you have a number of artifacts from the Jimmie Rodgers career, don't you?
Yeah, I've got one of Jimmy's guitars in my studio. I've got a little salt and pepper shaker that I shaped like the Victor dog, little nipper. I've got one of Jimmy's pipes, and of Mrs. Rodgers. I've got several other little things of Jimmy's, and then of Mrs. Rodgers, I have a bracelet and a ring and things like that. But I have made a collection over the years, Ralph, and...
You had a hat, but that was stolen, right?
No, I got all those items back.
Did you get it? You had a brakeman's hat?
Not of Jimmy's.
Okay,
No.
I was mistaken. Now, you must have thought a lot of the man to name your son Jimmie Rodgers.
Well, as I say, he was my idol, and I think that I voiced the thoughts of a good many great artists in our business today that would say the same thing, that they were inspired by Jimmy, and that he actually was their idol. I mean, people like Lefty Frizzell, the older ones, you know.
All right, now I'm curious about one point, Hank. Here you were growing up in the maritime provinces of Canada. That's a long way. Back in those days,
That's
it was
right.
a long way from the American music scene.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered how you happened to hear Jimmie Rodgers in those young years.
Well, that's back in 1931, 1932. Well, my mother had an old wind-up Victrola, like, you know, made probably by Path or Edison or something like that, and Jimmy's records were available in Canada, in different parts of Canada.
I see.
And I remember the first record I heard of Jimmy's was Moonlight and Skies,
So you were exposed to him early.
very early.
When you heard him, did you say to yourself, I'm going to be like that guy?
I certainly did. I certainly did.
I wanted to bring up a point and talk for a moment about your contract with RCA, because it has important significance. You have been with RCA for how long?
38 years.
Isn't that a record of some kind?
If it isn't, it's a good average.
I don't believe any other performer has been with one record label for that length of time.
Now, according to RCA Victor, they did research on it, and they say it's the oldest contract or the longest-term contract.
Haven't you just re-signed?
Yes, but I'd rather not go into that right now because they're planning an international publicity campaign or something to let the folks know that.
Well, what I wanted to bring up was the fact that if you complete this contract, you will have been with RCA for 50 years.
Either that or I'll be an awful old man.
But that's fantastic.
Thank you, Ralph. I'm very proud of it. I really am, and the association has been a very fine one. I mean, I've had a great association with the company, and, of course, I've seen a lot of changes in the industry and in the recording and so forth, but I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Hank, we've just about reached the end of the row here. I want to thank you very much for being our guest on the show.
Well, Ralph, it's been my pleasure, believe me, and I've really enjoyed it. I thoroughly have enjoyed it, and I think we've had a lot of fun, and you're great to work with. And I want to say a very special thanks to all of our listeners out there, wherever you might be, friends, for your kindness and keeping us tuned in. And we look forward to visiting with both you and Ralph again real soon. Ralph, thank you.